Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this is The Secrets of Symbols by Frater S.J. Marx, KRC. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 13, Number 7, August 1935. The Secrets of Symbols by Frater S.J. Marx, KRC. An address intended to be given at the 1935 Rosicrucian Convention by Frater Marx, who passed through transition as a result of an automobile accident while en route to Rosicrucian Park, San Jose. It is impossible for direct language to fully and completely express idealisms. If direct language answers to the immediate needs of man, nevertheless, it is insufficient to present in one great ensemble an idea with its developments, its corollaries, and its analogies. As sentiments and passions are best described by what may be termed a language of its own, which appeals to the inner qualities of mankind, such as music, painting, and sculpture, so are metaphysical ideals better developed and more completely understood through allegories and material figures, known as symbols. In every idea expressed either by speech or by writing, it is necessary to consider the form and the prime motive, the letter and spirit, the material envelope and the spiritual essence, or what may be better termed the exoteric and esoteric sides. Direct and precise language can expose a thought, but in its most external and incomplete form. The bulky, refractory nature of Western tongues, combined with the rigidity of our alphabetical system of representing not ideas but sounds, prevent utterly the essence of thought forcing its way through the mere series of words which constitute what is called a grammatically constructed sentence. This the ancient mystics of the Oriental nations understood perfectly well, and therefore gave to their speech a broader reach. Not only have their words a literal and strict signification, but also, and mainly, in a figurative sense. They richly imaged their language and spoke in apologues, fables, and parables, thus guiding the meditations of their hearers to an inexhaustible source of esoteric and scientific applications. Further writing as well as speech was imaged, and the Egyptian masters gave three principal interpretations to their graphic characters. Besides their phonetic value, these possessed also a symbolic or hieroglyphic and a sacred or hieratic meaning. One single word of the sacred tongue, Hebrew, contains within itself an inexhaustible subject of meditations which could not find place in volumes written in our direct, mathematical, graphic characters. Meaningless signs, strangled in the vice of a barbarous orthography and a tyrannical syntax. To understand the teachings of the masters and to perpetuate ancient wisdom, recourse to their secret symbolism is necessary. It was, besides, the primitive language of mankind. Let me illustrate by quoting you the first 3 verses of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Here is a statement that contains within itself all the forms of creations or studies of cosmologies. A volume could not do justice to the secret symbolism contained in these first 3 verses of the Bible. To those familiar with the teachings of the masters, and who can read the idealisms contained in the words used, a beautiful, esoteric construction is obtained. The word God itself in its symbolic form is made up of 3 mystic initials of words that are from an ancient language. G stands for Gomer or beauty. O stands for Oz or Strenoth. D stands for Debar or wisdom. Beauty is the soul, strength the body, wisdom the personality, the triune composition of the deity and its component symbolisms in man. If we use the Hebrew name for the Creator, which is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh or Jehovah, and analyze the symbolism contained in this name, we find, according to mystical numerology, that it equals the number 8. For Jod is 10, he is 5. Vav is 6, and he is 5, which total 26. 26 reduced to one number equals 8. And 8 is made up of a cryptic form of 2 circles, one placed on top of the other, the macrocosm and the microcosm. Here, in symbolic language, we find an attempt to give an idealistic conception of the Creator as beauty, wisdom, and strength, moral power, material power, spiritual power. You will note always the combination of triune conceptions, for without the use of the triangle, there can be no presentation of an abstract idealism into an understandable concrete form. The next verse, The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, expresses a symbolism that is interpreted likewise in an idealistic manner. There had as yet been no separation of the microcosm from the macrocosm, for God had not as yet begun creating, hence there existed no necessity for a separation of the earth plane from the cosmic. It is to be noted that the verse in Genesis specifically states, "The earth was without form and void." No reference is made to the heavens being chaotic. This, therefore, answers that question so often propounded by students of metaphysics. If there was chaos at the beginning, when was the real beginning? We as human beings are not concerned with a man-made beginning, for that would be trying to measure infinity, and as infinity has neither time, beginning, nor end, it is an abstract thing for which no language has yet been formulated to express such an idealism. The earth, however, is finite and can be expressed in a concrete manner. The next verse reads, "And darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. And God said, Let there be light, and there was light." Here is another secret symbolism that reads to the initiated the fact that until darkness had been expelled by the word of the Creator, the representative of the all-soul, light, the earth was a useless creation. We must remember that this light is not to be considered a luminary, for in the 14th to 18th verses, a concrete definition is given of luminaries. Light, as shown in the 3rd verse of Genesis, is that idealistic, mystical, abstract thing which man has named the soul, the representative of the Creator, without which nothing exists. Thus, in triune revelation, the first 3 verses of Genesis stated in secret symbolisms, when interpreted correctly, is not only religious and scientific, but interferes with no fundamental belief ever postulated by thinking mankind. A great secret symbolism is likewise contained in verses 26 and 27 of Genesis. "Let us make man in our own image, after our likeness," etc. God created man in his own image, and the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. There is a vast idealism in these 2 verses that has to do with many of the postulations of the Rosicrucians. Let us analyze what is meant by these symbolisms. Same and likeness. I mentioned that the word God is composed of an idealism of beauty, strength, and wisdom. Beauty is the soul, for without this nothing can manifest. This is only loaned to us, and by its manifestation we are living beings. We can neither improve or impair it. It is the divinity that resides within us. It is the basis of Rosicrucian ontology. Strength is our physical bodies, for without such a vehicle we would have no means of revealing ourselves to others in the present stage of evolution. This body is given to us by our parents in a mystical manner. It is properly called by the Rosicrucians the temple, and as such we are to nourish it and care for it to make it a proper place for the divinity to reside within. It is both negative and positive. The negative elements coming from food and water, and the positive elements from breathing and thinking. Wisdom is an idealism which has to do with the 3rd part of the triangle which forms man, our personality. This is our sole purpose to develop so that we may truly claim we are an image or a likeness of the deity. All the teachings and efforts of our order has been to help man create and perfect this personality so that it may become a true factor in the triangle of soul, body, and mind. Man in concrete language calls this abstract thing personality, character building. Thus we must accumulate wisdom by our own desires and free will, and the greater our idealisms urge us to perfect this personality to become like unto the Creator, the greater our strides to the acme of the human race, mastership. We could continue indefinitely on the secret symbolisms in the Bible, but there is likewise another viewpoint to take on this subject of secrets of symbolisms. Let us now turn to the Middle Ages. It is by no means an easy task to sum up in any brief form the general opinions, philosophical and scientific, of a scholar of the Middle Ages. While it is true that scholarly opinion was indeed on the whole at any one time more uniform than it is now because of the all-controlling influence of the Church, yet in those times many men had many minds. There is moreover another difficulty. We do not always know what men thought. Our own clear and accurate technical vocabularies within the fields of philosophy and still more of science are the products of a slow evolution, and on the whole modern. The ancient world and the Middle Ages did not in general think clearly because both lacked words to think with. Whoso in his day broke through the limitations of his thinking had no way in which to explain to himself or to his own generation or posterity. We would be entirely in ignorance of what were the real opinions of many great thinkers of former times if it were not for the great thoughts expressed in symbols. These symbols were used due to the lack of words in the expression of original ideas, and here lies the great secret of symbols. For students in their writings, unless they were initiates of the same mystery schools, came to quite opposite conclusions in their views. Even in those rare instances when great figures of the past saw their idealisms in the same form in which the questions come to us, their answers do not fit into our mental background. They could not state their results in our forms of words. Thus, in Egyptian symbology, the masters expressed the soul as the Ba, the personality as the Ka, the Khu as the spiritual intelligence, the Sekhem as the vital power, the cat as his physical body, and the Ab as his heart. Mankind, even today, unless he knows the interpretation of these cryptic representations of idealisms, confuses this picture writing with something entirely different from the intention of the masters. Yet in these secret symbols are contained as profound an understanding of the structure of man as has ever been postulated in modern times. In fact, most of the researches and cosmic revelations that come to us from ancient times would have been lost and confused if it had not been for this secret symbolism. Not only was this secrecy maintained in the written language for those who proved themselves worthy, but there was, as stated before, no suitable words coined to translate these abstract idealisms, so they had to be expressed in symbols, either written or spoken. Let me quote an example. No student of our ancient churches can fail to have noticed how frequently animals and other representatives of natural history are painted or carved therein. The question naturally occurs, are these sculptures or paintings mere grotesque creations of an artist's fancy, or have they some meaning which patient investigation will discover for us? It has only been lately that a satisfactory answer to these questions has been discovered to the artistic and scientific world, though our order always knew that these carvings were not merely freaks of fancy. It was quite by accident that this link of natural history of the Middle Ages was discovered, and which is contained in books called bestiaries, which can be found in any great library and can be studied by those who have the patience and requisite knowledge. Let us first understand what a typical bestiary is like. A bestiary may treat of about 30 or 40 animals and birds, real or mythical. It may be adorned with illuminated miniatures of each animal treated and will give a description of its supposed habits and appearance. Again, the writer may have some tale to tell about the animal. But last, and not least, for this is the prominent feature of the bestiaries, are given the religious and moral lessons which the animal's behavior can teach. Few books have entered more than the bestiaries into the common life of nations. Hence we can understand that the sculptor who is beautifying a church was not slow to use such familiar material. In thus laying the bestiaries under contribution, the builders of a church would be able to carry out an important object, the instruction of all future worshippers. The priest was there to instruct through the ears of the congregation, while the sculptures would instruct still more effectively through the eyes. No less an authority than Horace spoke of the eye as a medium of instruction. And what is still more important, all modern teachers agree with him. The original bestiary, generally called the physiologus, was produced in a far less scientific age than ours. No one knows who wrote the physiologus, and there is no clue to be traced from the title, which simply means the naturalist. But owing to its doctrinal and linguistic peculiarities, it has been assigned to an Alexandrine source. Authorities have shown that the majority of the animals mentioned in the bestiaries are to be found in Egypt, or may be seen there occasionally. Alexandrine philosophy, scholarship, and theology had many peculiarities. Some there were who tried to combine and reconcile the teachings of the Greek philosophers with the teachings of the Christ. Others again interpreted the Bible and even the natural history of the Bible in a more mystical and symbolic way. The result was that the plain, literal meaning was discredited. When current methods of natural history came in contact with the current methods of biblical interpretation, the latter were misunderstood. The physiologus was produced by these two tendencies combined. The translations of the Physiologus entered into all popular literature of Europe, and so it came about that animals from the East were represented in the churches of the West for the purpose of instructing medieval congregations. We can thus safely say that the secrets of symbols are in fact nothing more than ideas of expression due to the intellectual limitations in words. So we must be very careful when we read the works of the ancients and the scholars of medieval times. We should not altogether think they believed in all those strange animals such as dragons and centaurs, and gave to not only these but to common animals like the lion, the lamb, etc., attributes which we know they do not possess. They were only expressing ideas in a symbolic form. Thus, when we read in Job 12:7, "Ask the beasts that they shall teach thee, and the fowls of the air that they shall tell thee," it is not to be taken literally, but in the symbolic form intended by the great mystic, who was author of that book of the Bible. We are simply trying to be wiser than the masters if we do not learn from the fowls of the air and the lilies of the field. The expressions of thought, not alone in symbolical form, but also in picture form, have given more lasting impressions than could have been accomplished by hundreds of books. One wonders as he reads the Bible, both Old and New Testaments, at the many references of animals therein. Possibly the ass is mentioned at least 50 times in the Old Testament. Yet, if you will study the majority of the references, you will see that it is always intended to bring to your realization the idea of endurance. Buddhist sages counseled their disciples to take pattern by the humility and patience of the ass. When reference is made in literature and art to the bear, more especially in discussing with evident relish the contents of a hive of honey, an interpretation was meant that many a man has been lured to destruction by bodily and sensual delights. We have a reference in Psalm 80:13, where it is said, "The vine brought up out of Egypt, that the wild boar out of the wood doth root it up, and the wild beasts of the field devour it." This is simply an expression symbolically made that the power of evil is trying to uproot and destroy the power of the Creator. The fox is presumed to ensnare the unwary fowls by pretending to be dead. Here is a symbolism of the unwary persons who love corrupt things, and who will, if not careful, lose their own souls. We frequently read of the horns of the antelope, which are so powerful that he can saw trees asunder with them. The horns of the antelope represent the Old and New Testaments, which man is to use as teachings to resist adversaries. The lion is represented in a good and evil aspect in symbolism. The lion was supposed to sleep with his eyes open. This is the symbol of the awakenedness of the spirit of good, whilst the human body is wrapped in the sleep of death. Psalm 121:4 can be quoted in this connection. "Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep." This, of course, is a representation of the good aspect of the lion. The evil aspect is intended when the lion is shown as being subdued by some hero, such as Samson or David. The symbolism here intended is the subduing of the passions. We even to this day use the expression "from the lion's mouth." This is expressive of the symbolism of David in 1 Samuel 17:35. There is said of David that when a lion took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by the beard and smote and slew him. The lions in which the story of Daniel is so symbolically pictured in their den has both an evil and then a good aspect. And so one could continue indefinitely with the symbolisms in the Bible as to animals. The Bible is most certainly the greatest book, both mystically and symbolically, that has ever been given to man. If we read it literally, we will lose all of its symbolisms. But when we take it verse by verse and see the secrets of symbols contained therein, we marvel at the pristine knowledge that was conveyed to us by this ancient tale of mankind. We must therefore ever search for the idealisms contained not only in the Bible, but in all ancient expressions. We do not get very far with understanding any history or science unless we can trace the symbolism of the ideals contained in them. Likewise, we must be always careful that there is a great difference in the modern book and the ancient writings. Our present books, for instance, are first written out in full and then carefully corrected by an author. Next, it passes through the hands of the publisher's copyman and is again carefully edited. It is then set in galleys, and a proofreader goes over it for mistakes of the printer and author alike. In page proof, it gets another revision, and when it is presumably about as right as it can be made, it is cast into plates from which it is to be printed. After that, to change a comma or a semicolon is a costly performance. In addition, there is a copyright law to prevent undue borrowing, while anybody who uses so much as a single sentence of its text puts the borrowing in quotation marks. Not so before the invention of printing. All books were written out by hand anyway, and it was always just as easy to make changes as to recopy the old text. Nobody ever quoted. If an author wanted to use old material, he simply copied off what he liked, left out whatever he did not like, and altered that which he preferred some other way. Each new book was made by stringing together parts of as many old ones as the author cared to use, with addition to whatever the writer had picked up himself, variegated with all the misinterpretations and most of the clerical errors of all the authors and copyists that had gone before. Nobody had any conscience about borrowing. Nobody had any conscience about making alterations, omissions, and interpretations of borrowed material, and then passing it off as original. We commonly dwell on the copyists' errors in old manuscripts. We too often ignore how much of the old manuscript is what we would now call a deliberate forgery. All really ancient works, therefore, are essentially secretions. They start with a nucleus and grow slowly by additions, as one scribe after another recopies and re-edits the first. Commonly, the accretion around one nucleus fuses later with the accretion around another. These in their turn fuse with a third, fourth, and fifth, until it becomes most difficult for the expert to disentangle the several elements. But disentangled they must be, else they cannot in modern times be used for scientific data or history. This will account in the main for the two versions of Genesis. There is the Elohistic version and the priestly version, and it is only when we separate the symbolism contained in both versions that we can reconcile the two narratives and the truths that are revealed. If we take a literal translation of these two narratives, we become confused. But when we see with a clear vision, our eyes are indeed open to the mystical tale told in Genesis. The mystic has ever put his thoughts into secret symbols, which we call picture writing, and how much better it would be for the student if this procedure were more common even today. A picture that represented an idealism could never be misunderstood for anything else. For when a Rosicrucian student sees the triangle with the base in a certain position, he immediately knows whether it is a material or a cosmic manifestation. He searches for the symbolism of the Trinity that the triangle represents, for he knows at once that it represents a completed, perfected idealism. When he sees the astrofigures of the planets such as Venus, the circle above the cross, he knows at once that an idealism of love or beauty is intended. Of Mercury, the circle above the cross, and the half moon above the circle, he realizes that intelligence is being announced. Or if he sees a picture of Mars, a cross above the circle, he knows that the mystic was writing about an unfinished state of evolution. For until the cross, the idealisms of man's burdens are placed beneath the mastership of the microcosm, the one circle. The work of the student has not been completed. One could continue indefinitely with picture writing and of its secret symbolism. But the time I have is limited, and if I have accomplished but one purpose in this brief talk, that of presenting to you the importance of reading symbols, whether it is in speech or in writing, I will have rendered the service of directing your studies into a pleasant path of learning, one that will be productive of unfolding much of the secrets of symbols. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.